Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a question that sounds simple, but really isn't. Where does Earth actually end and space begin?
Yeah, it's surprisingly fuzzy.
Right. It's not some neat line painted on the sky. And figuring out where that boundary lies, well, it has some pretty big implications. We're talking law, astronaut qualifications, the whole shebang.
Absolutely.
So the term you often hear is the Karman Line. That's our focus today. We're going to unpack what it is, where the idea came from, why scientists are still, debating it, and why this invisible line matters so much.
Mm-hmm.
And just so you know, we've pulled together a lot of comprehensive material on the Karman Line for this deep dive, so we've got a solid taste for our chat.
And it's fascinating because while lots of people accept the Karman Line as the edge of space, it's really more of a convention, a useful agreement maybe, but not like a Sutter physical wall.
That's a key point right there, a conventional agreement. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the definition most people know.
The 100-kilometer mark.
Yeah. Exactly. 100 kilometers, which is about, 62 miles, 330,000 feet above mean sea level. This is the number used by the FAI, the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale.
Right, the World Air Sports Federation. They set this standard back in the 1960s.
Okay, but why 100 kilometers? What was the FAI trying to achieve with that specific altitude?
Well, their main goal was practical, differentiating between aeronautics flying within that 100 kilometers and astronautics activity beyond 100 kilometers.
So like planes versus rockets.
Essentially, yes. It was about setting records and managing different types of flight activity. Below 100 kilometers, you're dealing with air-breathing craft, aerodynamic lift. Above it, you're in space territory.
But as you said, the atmosphere doesn't just hit a wall at 100 kilometers. It thins out gradually. So this FAI line is, well, it's conventional, as you said. Not everyone agrees it's the physical boundary.
Precisely. Experts still debate where the true boundary might lie, physically speaking. The atmosphere keeps going, albeit very thinly.
So what's the practical impact of this 100-kilometer line, then, if it's not a hard physical stop?
Its main weight is really in the legal and regulatory world. It helps define where national airspace ends and outer space begins, even though international law itself is actually a bit vague on a precise definition.
Oh, really? International law doesn't define it?
Not explicitly with a fixed altitude, no. But many international bodies like the UN often reference the FAI's 100-kilometer standard or something very close to it. It's become a de facto standard for things like sovereignty and jurisdiction.
Okay, so it's a useful legal fiction, almost. Now, this line gets its name from Theodor von Karman, a Hungarian-American engineer.
A giant in aerodynamics and fluid mechanics.
Right. But here's the twist. Karman's own calculations put the theoretical limit for aeroplane flight lower, didn't they? Something like 83.8 kilometers or 52 miles?
That's correct. His original work suggested a boundary closer to 84 kilometers. It's different from the nice round 100 kilometers the FAI settled on later.
So what was Karman actually calculating? What was his core idea?
He was looking at the physics of flight. Specifically, at what altitude does aerodynamic lift the force generated by wings pushing air become basically useless for keeping a craft airborne?
Because the air gets too thin.
Exactly. As you go higher, you need to fly faster and faster to generate enough lift from the thinning air. Karman figured out the altitude where the speed needed to get any significant lift would actually be fast enough to put you into orbit around the Earth.
Ah, I see. So the forces change dominance.
Precisely. He used the example of Captain Kincheloh's X-2 rocket plane flight. Karman noted that way down at, say, 38,500 meters, aerodynamic lift was still doing almost all the work, like 98% of it.
Okay.
But if you pushed up to around 91,000 meters, or about 57 miles, that relationship flips. There's so little air that inertia, or what some call the Kepler force, takes over. You're essentially flying based on orbital mechanics, not wing lift.
So that transition point where lift gives way to inertia, that was Karman's physical boundary.
That was the essence of his calculation, yes.
And this idea then got picked up legally. You mentioned Andrew G. Haley, a space lawyer.
Yes, in his 1963 book, Space Law and Government, he's the one who seems to have really popularized the term Karman jurisdictional line.
Jurisdictional line. I like that. What was his take?
He proposed using Karman's calculated boundary as the legal dividing line. Above it, space would be free territory, like international waters. Below it, the airspace would belong to the country underneath. A neat concept.
But Haley knew it wasn't that simple, right? He talked about inherent imprecision.
He did. He acknowledged it wasn't a sharp line in the sky, but more of a mean or median measurement. He understood it was a transitional zone and that Other factors, like the actual composition of the air or even whether humans could survive there, also played a part in defining where space really begins.
Right, it's not just about the machine. Okay, this brings us back to the atmosphere just fading away. You said it doesn't just stop. If we consider the very upper layers, the thermosphere, the exosphere,
Yeah.
how far out does Earth's atmosphere technically go?
Oh, incredibly far if you count those extremely tenuous outer layers. We're talking potentially up to 10,000 kilometers or over 6,000 miles.
Wow. Okay, so Karman wasn't trying to find the last molecule of air.
No, not at all. He was focused on that functional limit for aerodynamic flight. His 1956 paper on aerothermal limits is key here. He plotted speed against altitude, and there was a clear inflection point on his chart around 275,000 feet, which is that 83.8 kilometers again.
And that inflection point showed.
It showed that above that altitude, the minimum speed needed to maintain flight would actually exceed orbital velocity for that height. So your aircraft would effectively become an orbiting spacecraft. Lift is no longer the dominant factor keeping you up.
So Haley coined Karman Line in 1959 based on that chart. But even he knew that number wasn't set in stone.
Right. He recognized that 275,000 feet was theoretical and that advancements in technology, like the X-2 plane itself, would likely shift the practical boundaries.
Makes sense. And didn't Haley also mention another altitude? Something about atomic oxygen?
Yes. Interestingly, he also referred to 295,000 feet, which is about 90 kilometers, as the von Karman line in some contexts. He linked that altitude to the lowest level where you find significant amounts of free radical atomic oxygen.
So even in the early days, there were multiple technical factors and slightly different numbers floating around.
Exactly. It highlights the complexity right from the start.
Which probably explains why the FAI's 100 kilometers isn't the only game in town today. The U.S., for instance, uses a different standard, doesn't it?
It does, particularly the U.S. Armed Forces and NASA, for astronaut wings at least. They use 50 miles, which is roughly 80 kilometers, as their threshold for spaceflight.
80 kilometers. That's a significant difference from 100. Why 80?
Well, 80 kilometers roughly corresponds to the boundary between the mesosphere and the thermosphere. There are significant atmospheric changes there. It's seen by some as a more physically meaningful boundary than the round 100-kilometer number.
And this isn't just a theoretical debate. It had real consequences for some pilots, didn't it? The X-15 pilots.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great story. In 2005, NASA actually changed its definition for astronaut wings to align more closely with the Air Force's 50-mile standard.
So what happened?
Well, 3 legendary X-15 pilots from the 1960s, John McKay, William Dana, and Joseph Walker, had flown missions that went higher than 80 kilometers, but didn't quite reach the 100-kilometer FAI line. Walker actually exceeded 100 kilometers on some flights, but McKay and Dana flew into that ambiguous zone.
Between 80 and 100 kilometers.
Exactly. So when NASA officially adopted the lower 80-kilometer standard in 2005, these pilots, 2 of them posthumously, were retroactively awarded their astronaut wings.
Wow. Decades later, that really shows how fluid this definition has been.
It really does. Imagine flying that high in the 60s, and then decades later, the definition shifts and you're officially an astronaut.
Yeah.
It underscores the human impact of these seemingly arbitrary lines.
And the debate continues. There's been a recent academic work challenging the 100-kilometer standard again, right?
Yes, quite significantly. Jonathan McDowell at Harvard-Smithsonian and Thomas Gingal at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln published research in 2018 strongly arguing for 80 kilometers or 50 miles.
And what's their evidence?
They looked back at Karman's original notes and calculations, arguing they actually support a boundary closer to 80-ish kilometers, around 270,000 feet.
Okay, back to Karman's original work.
Right. Plus, they presented evidence about spacecraft orbits. Objects in highly elliptical orbits can apparently survive multiple perigees, their lowest points dipping down into the 80 to 90 kilometer altitude range without immediately burning up or being dragged down completely.
Suggesting that altitude behaves more like space than dense atmosphere.
That's the implication. And they also point to meteors. Most meteors burn up or disintegrate in the 70 to 100 kilometer range. They argue this indicates significant atmospheric interaction really ramps up below 80 or 90 kilometers, making that a more natural physical transition.
So Karman's original math, satellite behavior, meteor data, it seems like a strong case for 80 kilometer.
It's compelling evidence, and it definitely made waves.
Did the FAI react to this?
They did. These findings actually led the FAI to propose a joint workshop or conference with the International Astronautical Federation, the IAF, back in 2019. The goal was explicitly to fully explore the issue of the Karman Line definition.
So the door's open for revision, even at the FAI.
It appears so. It signals that the body that established the 100-kilometer convention is acknowledging the ongoing scientific debate and might be willing to reconsider based on new evidence. It's definitely not a closed book.
Interesting. Are there any other definitions out there? You mentioned international law being vague.
Well, sometimes in legal or treaty discussions, you hear references to the boundary being the lowest perigee attainable by an orbiting space vehicle, but without actually putting a number on it.
Which sounds logical, but also conveniently avoids specifics.
Precisely. And the U.S. government, as we touched on, has generally resisted defining a single precise regulatory boundary for various strategic and legal reasons. They prefer some ambiguity.
Keep their options open.
Seems to be the case. Although it's worth noting for context, if you want a satellite to complete even one full circular orbit without propulsion, it generally needs to stay above about 150 kilometers or 93 miles. Below that, atmospheric drag is usually too strong.
Right, so even 100 kilometers is pretty low for sustained orbits.
It is. It really emphasizes that this edge is a zone, not a sharp line.
Okay, this has all been very Earth-focused, but the underlying physics Karman described lift versus orbital mechanics that should apply anywhere with an atmosphere, right?
Absolutely. The principle is universal, and scientists have actually tried to calculate equivalent Karman lines for other planets.
Oh, cool. Like Mars.
Yes, for Mars, with its much thinner atmosphere, estimates vary. One study by Isidora Martinez suggests around 80 kilometers, while another by Nicholas Barron puts it higher, maybe 113 kilometers.
And Venus, it has that super thick atmosphere.
Right, so for Venus, the estimates are much higher. Martinez suggests around 250 kilometers, and Barron estimates maybe 303 kilometers.
Wow. So the edge of space is much higher up on Venus. That really drives home that it's tied to the specific atmosphere.
Exactly. It's a physical principle adapted to local conditions.
And this whole idea, this boundary, it's captured the public imagination too, hasn't it? I think I saw a film reference.
You might be thinking of the 2014 British short film, The Karman Line.
That's the one, with Olivia Colman.
Yes, where her character mysteriously starts levitating upwards, crossing that symbolic boundary. It shows how this scientific concept can take on a kind of poetic or metaphorical meaning.
For sure. So wrapping this up, the Karman Line. It seems simple at first glance, maybe just 100 kilometers, but it's actually this complex mix of physics, engineering, legal needs, and ongoing scientific argument.
It really is. It's a perfect example of how we try to define boundaries in a universe that often deals in gradual transitions, and it's not static.
No, definitely not.
It's a dynamic concept. New data comes in, technology improves like reusable rockets, suborbital tourism vehicles, and our understanding of that upper atmosphere evolves. Which raises a really interesting point.
Go on.
Well, if the definition itself is still being debated and potentially shifting, what does it really mean to reach space? Is it hitting 80K, 100K, or something else entirely?
That's the perfect closing thought. As space becomes more accessible, with commercial flights blurring the lines between aviation and space travel, how will we define that edge? Will our definition of the Karman Line keep evolving along with our technology? Something for all of us to think about.
Definitely.
Join us next time for another deep dive. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on, well, a really crucial journey, understanding suicide. Now, this is obviously a profoundly sensitive subject and it touches so many lives. Often, assumptions can really overshadow genuine insight. So our mission today is to move past those assumptions. We've gathered insights from a pretty comprehensive source, a detailed overview that covers, global stats, history, prevention, even some surprising bits about the natural world. Our goal, to give you a shortcut to being truly well-informed, maybe offering perspectives you haven't come across before. Okay, let's delve in.
Right. And to really get started, we need clarity on what we're actually discussing.
Mm-hmm.
So fundamentally, suicide is defined as the act of intentionally causing one's own death.
Okay, intentionally.
Exactly. And it's important to distinguish that from related ideas. For instance, an attempted suicide involves self-injury, where there's at least some desire to die, but thankfully it doesn't result in death. Then you have assisted suicide, where someone provides indirect help, maybe advice or the means. And euthanasia is different again. That's where another person takes an active role in ending someone's life. We also hear terms like suicidal ideation, that's having thoughts about ending one's life, but without, actively trying to.
Just the thoughts.
Yes. And suicidality usually indicates a higher risk,
Yeah.
especially if there's clear intent and maybe even a plan.
Okay, that distinction is helpful. And what's really insightful here is how the language we use around suicide has shifted. Why does that matter so much?
It matters hugely. For a long time, the common phrase was committed suicide.
Yeah, you still hear it sometimes.
You do, but there's been a really significant intentional move away from it. You see organizations like the Center for Suicide Prevention, the American Psychological Association, even major news outlets like the AP and CNN.
They all advise against it.
Yes, exactly, because the word commit, well, it carries baggage. It implies criminality or sin or some kind of moral wrong.
Right, like you commit a crime or commit a sin.
I see.
Using it for suicide could, inadvertently stigmatize people.
Precisely. It can place blame and add to the grief for families. So the preferred terms now are things like died by suicide or took their own life, maybe killed themselves.
It seems subtle, but it feels like a powerful change in perspective.
It really is. And this shift isn't just about, political correctness or semantics. It reflects a deeper societal understanding. By moving away from judgmental language, we help to destigmatize suicide. It fosters more open discussion, removes blame, and hopefully makes it easier for people to seek help.
That makes perfect sense, choosing words that show empathy rather than judgment.
Exactly. It creates a different environment.
Okay, so with that foundation, let's try and grasp the sheer scale of this issue globally. How big a problem are we talking about?
Well, it's significant. It's consistently ranked among the top causes of death worldwide, often in the top 10.
Wow.
It accounts for about 1.5% of all deaths globally. To put a number on that, back in 2016, nearly 800,000 people died by suicide.
800,000, that's huge.
It is. It averages out to about 12 people per 100,000 each year, globally. And crucially, for every person who dies by suicide, there are estimates of 10 to 20 million non-fatal attempts each year.
10 to 20 million attempts. That contrast is staggering.
It really highlights the extent of suicidal ideation and distress. Looking at trends, global rates actually went up by about 60% between the 1960s and 2012.
60% increase. Where was that happening mostly?
Primarily in the developing world. Geographically, Europe had some of the highest rates back in 2015, and because of their huge populations, China and India account for over half of all suicides worldwide. China is also interesting because it's one of the few places where female suicide rates are actually higher than male rates.
That's unusual, right? Because generally,
Globally, men die by suicide almost twice as often as women. And in many developed countries, that gap is even wider, maybe 3 to 4 times more frequent for men.
why such a big difference?
It often comes down to the methods used. Men tend to use methods that are more immediately lethal, whereas women have a higher rate of non-fatal attempts.
Okay. And does age factor in significantly?
It does. Globally, suicide is most common in people over 70. But, and this is tragic, in many developed countries, for adolescents and young men, it's the second most common cause of death, right after accidents.
The second biggest killer for young men. That's sobering.
It really is.
So understanding these global patterns helps put things in context. How do these trends look, say, in the United States?
Unfortunately, the U.S. has seen a concerning rise in rates. In 2022, there were 49,500 deaths recorded. That's the highest number ever.
Highest ever. That's worrying.
It is. The U.S. also had a disproportionate share of global gun suicides in 2019, the highest per capita rate, actually.
And are there specific groups within the U.S. who are at higher risk?
Yes. One demographic that stands out is Caucasian men over the age of 80. They have the highest suicide rate in the U.S. It just underscores that even within broad patterns, specific groups face elevated risks.
Right. So all of this complexity brings us to the question so many people ask, the why. Why does this happen?
And that's where it gets incredibly complex. There's almost never a single cause.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's not just one thing.
Absolutely not. It's almost always a confluence of factors. Think of it like a cumulative burden, where multiple things, individual issues, social situations, environmental factors all interact.
A mosaic, you said earlier.
Exactly, a mosaic. Mental health conditions are definitely a significant piece of that puzzle. They're present in a large majority of suicides. Conditions like major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder can increase the risk substantially, maybe 20-fold, as we mentioned.
Wow.
Other conditions, too, like schizophrenia or personality disorders, particularly borderline personality disorder, which impacts emotional regulation and relationships, are frequently linked. And it's sobering to realize that many individuals who die by suicide have actually seen a doctor in the year leading up to their death.
That suggests missed opportunities, perhaps.
It certainly raises questions about screening and intervention, yes. Substance misuse is another major factor.
Like alcohol.
Alcoholism is frequently involved, yes. And you often see higher suicide rates in countries with higher alcohol consumption or even just higher density of bars. Also, the misuse of certain prescribed medications, like benzodiazepines or illicit substances like heroin or methamphetamine, significantly elevates the risk. It's a powerful, often dangerous interplay.
So mental health and substance use are big factors. What else do the sources point to?
Well, probably the single strongest predictor is a previous suicide attempt.
Really? Stronger than a diagnosis?
Yes. Someone who has attempted suicide before is significantly more likely, maybe 25 times more likely to die by suicide later. About 1% die within a year of a first attempt.
That's a critical risk factor to be aware of.
Absolutely. And physical health problems also play a profound role. Things like chronic pain or traumatic brain injury, TBI, which is brain damage from an external force.
Like in accidents or sports.
Exactly. Also, serious illnesses like cancer, which can double the frequency, or HIV, chronic fatigue, kidney failure, these can all increase vulnerability. In Japan, for instance, health problems are often cited as a primary justification.
It makes sense that severe physical suffering could contribute. What about psychosocial factors? Things like feelings or circumstances.
Hugely important. Feelings of hopelessness are very common. A loss of pleasure in life, what doctors call anhedonia, extreme agitation, sometimes rigid thinking, poor coping skills, poor impulse control.
And social situations.
Definitely. Social isolation is a big one. Poverty. Feeling like a burden, which is sometimes seen in older adults. Relationship status, like never being married. We see the impact of economic hardship, too, like the terrible situation with farmer suicides in India due to debt, hundreds of thousands since 1997, or the disparity between rural and urban areas in China. These social and economic pressures are undeniable.
It really feels like almost every sphere of life can potentially play a role. Individual feelings, health, social connections, economics.
It does. Even early childhood trauma, like sexual abuse or being in foster care, increases risk. Bullying is another factor. Problem gambling is associated to a significant percentage of problem gamblers attempt suicide.
Are there any more sort of surprising or less commonly discussed factors?
There are some interesting environmental links. Things like air pollution, believe it or not, even intense sunlight and hot weather show some association.
Hot weather, you'd think maybe the opposite.
It's counterintuitive, but suicide rates do tend to increase in spring and summer. Genetics also plays a part. Estimates suggest genetics accounts for maybe 38 to 55% of suicidal behaviors. A family history, especially on the mother's side, can affect children's risk.
What about neurodiversity?
That's an important area. Autistic individuals are about 3 times as likely to attempt suicide. And sadly, for autistic people without co-occurring learning disabilities, suicide is a leading cause of early death.
That's crucial information.
And one more quite unique factor, media influence. There's something called the Werther effect.
The Werther effect.
Yeah, named after a Goethe novel. It describes how media coverage that glorifies or sensationalizes suicide can, unfortunately, lead to copycat suicides.
Wow. Is there a flip side to that?
Yes, thankfully. It's called the Papageno effect, named after a character in Mozart's opera The Magic Flute. This refers to the protective effect when media responsibly reports on suicide and highlights stories of coping and resilience.
So media can harm, but it can also help.
Exactly. Responsible reporting is key. We also see elevated risk in certain occupations, like military careers, and for war veterans, often linked to PTSD and physical health issues. Even infection with Toxoplasma gondii, a parasite, has shown some association in studies.
Goodness, the list is incredibly long and complex. It really drives home that suicide is rarely, if ever, simple.
It really isn't.
But despite all this complexity, the sources also talk about hope and intervention. So what does this all mean for making a difference? What can actually be done for prevention?
Well, a core strategy and a very effective one is means restriction.
Means restriction. So making it harder to access lethal methods?
Exactly. It sounds simple, but limiting access to things like firearms, certain pesticides, specific medications, even charcoal in some places can save lives. It creates a barrier, a pause.
And physical barriers, too.
Yes, things like safety nets or fences on bridges like the ones eventually installed on the Golden Gate Bridge after years of debate, or barriers on subway platforms. They've proven to significantly reduce impulsive attempts at those locations. It buys crucial time.
That makes sense. Creating that moment of delay. What about treatment?
Treating underlying mental health conditions is obviously critical. Psychotherapy can be very effective. One specific type, dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT.
EBT.
Yes, it teaches skills for managing intense emotions, tolerating distress, and improving relationships. It's shown real success in reducing suicidality, particularly in adolescents and people with borderline personality disorder.
Okay, therapy helps. What about medication? Is there a clear role there?
It's a it's a nuanced picture. Some common antidepressants like SSRIs have a complex relationship with suicide risk. They might slightly increase risk in younger people initially, but seem to decrease it in older adults. It's not straightforward.
So not a simple pill fixes its situation.
Definitely not. However, some specific medications do have a proven positive impact. Lithium, for instance, used for bipolar disorder and major depression, can lower suicide risk significantly, almost down to the level of the general population for those who respond well. Clozapine, an antipsychotic, can reduce suicidal thoughts in some patients with schizophrenia, and more recently, ketamine has shown promise for rapidly reducing suicidal ideation in crisis situations.
So specialized treatments exist, but are there any, I don't know, simpler interventions that work? Things that are maybe more accessible?
Yes, absolutely. And this one is really quite compelling. Caring letters.
Caring letters, what are those?
It's a simple, low-cost intervention. It involves sending brief, personal letters, not form letters, but genuinely expressing interest and care to individuals after they've had a suicidal crisis, perhaps after discharge from hospital.
Just sending letters.
Yes, and a major study, a proper randomized controlled trial, found that these letters actually reduced subsequent deaths by suicide. It really speaks to the power of human connection, of letting someone know they haven't been forgotten.
Wow, that's actually quite moving. Such a simple thing making a real difference.
It is. And beyond specific interventions, lifestyle factors can play a role too. A healthy diet, lots of fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, oily fish for omega-3s, seems to reduce depression risk. Deficiencies in certain B vitamins like B2, B6, B12 have been linked to depression, especially in women. And maybe avoiding too many refined carbs.
So diet matters. What about screening? Should everyone be asked about suicide?
The evidence for screening the general population isn't very strong. However, importantly, asking someone directly about suicidality does not increase their risk. That's a myth.
Okay, that's good to know.
And screening is effective in specific settings, like emergency departments, especially for people who come in after self-harming. It helps identify those with ongoing ideation or intent. Other protective factors include strong social support, economic development, good follow-up care after an attempt, and preventing childhood trauma.
This deep dive really shows how our understanding has evolved. And that brings us to another fascinating angle: the history and culture surrounding suicide. Our current views are really shaped by centuries of changing beliefs, aren't they?
Absolutely. It's a crucial lens. If you look back, attitudes have varied dramatically. In ancient Athens, for example, someone who died by suicide without the state's approval might be denied a normal burial. Sometimes their hand was even cut off and buried separately.
Really? That's harsh.
It was. Ancient Rome initially permitted it, but later shifted towards criminalizing it, partly for economic reasons. Losing productive citizens or soldiers was costly. Philosophers differed too. Aristotle condemned it. Plato was more ambivalent.
And then with Christianity.
With the rise of Christianity in Europe, suicide became strongly condemned as a grave sin. The Council of Arles in 452 AD was a key point. It was seen as violating "thou shalt not kill," an offense against God. Historically, this often meant denial of Christian burial services. Although it's worth noting, the modern Catholic Catechism does acknowledge that severe mental illness can diminish a person's responsibility.
So there was a long period where it was viewed primarily as a sin. When did that start to change?
The shift really began during the Renaissance and especially the Enlightenment. Thinkers like John Donne wrote defenses of suicide, and David Hume argued it wasn't inherently a crime if it harmed no one else. By the 19th century in Europe, the dominant view started shifting from seeing suicide as a sin to seeing it more as a sign of mental illness, or insanity, as they might have termed it then.
The medicalization shift.
Exactly, and that paved the way for decriminalization in most Western countries, mostly in the 20th century. The UK decriminalized it in 1961, Ireland not until 1993. The word suicide itself, by the way, is relatively modern. It came into English from Latin only around the late 17th century.
That's interesting. And culturally, the variations must be even wider.
Oh, absolutely. Think of Japanese seppuku, ritual suicide, which could be seen as an honorable way to atone for failure or make a protest. In some traditional Inuit cultures, under specific, harsh circumstances, an elderly person ending their life might have been viewed as an act of respect or wisdom, ensuring the group's survival.
Very different perspectives.
And philosophically, there's ongoing debate about concepts like rational suicide. Can someone make a truly reasoned choice to end their life? Or altruistic suicide acts intended to benefit others, like the elder example, or perhaps some interpretations of kamikaze pilots' motivations during wartime.
There have also been, tragically, mass suicides.
Yes, events like Jonestown, with over 900 members of the People's Temple, or during the Battle of Saipan in World War II, where thousands of Japanese civilians jumped from cliffs rather than be captured. These are complex and horrifying events.
And today, legally, it's still quite varied.
Very much so. Suicide or attempted suicide remains a criminal offense in some Muslim-majority nations and in Malaysia. And quite starkly, North Korea reportedly criminalized suicide as an act of treason just last year in 2023.
Treason?
Wow. On the other hand, you have places like the Netherlands, Switzerland, and some U.S. states like Oregon and Washington, where physician-assisted suicide is legal under very strict conditions for terminally ill patients.
So a real patchwork of laws and attitudes.
Yeah.
And you mentioned infamous locations earlier.
Yes, places like the Golden Gate Bridge or Japan's Aokigahara Forest unfortunately become associated with suicide. But the implementation of barriers at such sites, as we discussed under prevention, shows that interventions can work even in these challenging contexts.
It all ties together. Now, you mentioned something really surprising earlier, animal behavior.
Ah, yes. It's a fascinating, if controversial, area. If we broaden the view right out, we see behaviors in the animal kingdom that look self-destructive.
Look self-destructive.
Well, defining it as suicide is tricky because that usually implies conscious, willful intent, which is hard, if not impossible, to prove in non-human animals.
Right, intent is key.
But the behaviors themselves are remarkable. Our sources mention certain types of salmonella bacteria that seem to sacrifice themselves to trigger an immune response that helps the colony overcome competing bacteria. There are Brazilian ants where some individuals seal the nest entrance from the outside each night, essentially a death sentence to protect the colony.
Wow.
Pea aphids can literally explode themselves when attacked by a predator like a ladybug. It's called autothesis, scattering warning signals and protecting their relatives nearby. Some termite species have exploding soldiers that rupture their bodies to release a sticky, toxic goo onto enemies.
Exploding termites. That's incredible.
It is. Now, again, we wouldn't call this suicide in the human sense. It's likely driven by instinct and kin selection for the survival of the group or genes. But these examples of self-sacrificial behavior in nature are certainly striking and make you think about the different forms survival can take.
What an incredibly broad and deep dive this has been. We've covered so much ground, from the careful definitions and the global numbers through the really complex web of risk factors, biological, psychological, social, and then that fascinating journey through history, culture, and even into the animal kingdom. I think what's really clear is that suicide is this profoundly complex public health issue. There are so many varied risk factors, mental, physical, social, environmental. And how it's been viewed has changed dramatically over time and across cultures. But crucially, there are effective prevention strategies, things ranging from, practical steps like means restriction to therapies like DBT, and even those simple, powerful caring letters. Understanding all these nuances feels absolutely vital if we want to have informed conversations and offer compassionate action in our communities. This deep dive really shows that while suicide is always a deeply personal tragedy, it's also, in a way, a powerful reflection of our collective humanity, our societies, maybe even the natural world in some strange way. So maybe a final thought for you, the listener. How might a greater understanding of all these varied facets change how you approach conversations about mental health and support within your own community? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this has offered you a clearer, more informed perspective on a topic that truly deserves our thoughtful attention. Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever just, stopped to think about the sheer audacity, the monumental task of taking J.R.R. Tolkien's sprawling, beloved Lord of the Rings epic and actually bringing it to life on the screen?
Oh, absolutely. It's a journey almost as epic as Frodo's, really.
Exactly.
And what's fascinating here isn't just the films themselves, the ones we all know and love, but the incredible journey of their creation. The challenges they overcame, the sheer ambition behind it all, and, well, the lasting impact they've had.
It really is something else. So today, we're taking a deep dive into your collected sources, specifically the comprehensive Wikipedia article on the Lord of the Rings film series. We want to uncover some of those surprising facts, the behind-the-scenes drama, and just the scale of ambition that made this trilogy a global phenomenon. Our mission here is to shortcut you to being really well-informed about one of cinema's greatest achievements, give you those aha moments about Middle-earth on screen.
Sounds great. Where should we start? The very beginning.
Let's. Because before Peter Jackson's vision, there were other attempts, right? Animated films by Rankin Bass, and importantly, Ralph Bakshi.
Right, the 1978 Bakshi film.
Yeah, and what's kind of amazing is that a teenage Peter Jackson actually saw that film, and apparently he was so confused by its unfinished ending.
It just stops, doesn't it?
Right, so he went and read the book to find out what happened. Talk about an unexpected start to a lifelong project.
That really sets the stage, because if we connect this to the bigger picture, adapting Tolkien was always tricky, especially the rights situation. It was a real tangled web.
How so?
Well, the rights passed through various hands. Jackson and Fran Walsh initially pitched a Hobbit film and 2 Lord of the Rings films to Miramax. But the Hobbit rights were notoriously difficult to secure, split between different parties.
Ah, okay, so they couldn't get The Hobbit initially.
Exactly. So they pivoted, settling on just the 2 Lord of the Rings films.
Okay, but then, and this is where it gets really interesting, right? Miramax, specifically the Weinsteins, they pushed back hard.
They did. They eventually insisted on cutting the whole thing down to a single 2-hour movie.
2 hours?
Yeah.
For the entire Lord of the Rings. That's inconceivable.
Jackson thought so too. He'd argued for at least 4 hours, even across 2 films. He apparently thought their demand for one 2-hour film was just a bluff, a tactic.
A dangerous gamble.
A very dangerous one. And it raises that classic question. What happens when artistic vision clashes head-on with studio demands for, well, a smaller, maybe safer product?
So what happened? Did Miramax back down?
No, the project went into turnaround. Basically, Miramax let it go, opening the door for someone else.
Which is where New Line Cinema comes in.
Precisely. Robert Shea, the CEO of New Line, stepped in. And this is the pivotal moment. Instead of trimming it further, he famously asked, shouldn't it be 3 films?
Wow. He wanted to expand it.
He saw the potential. 3 books, 3 films. It made sense commercially and artistically. It was a huge risk, but it completely changed the trajectory.
And what a trajectory. This wasn't just making 3 movies. It became one of the biggest, most ambitious film projects ever. The budget was, what, $281 million back then?
Yep, around $281 million for all 3, which is something like $530 million in today's money, a staggering amount.
But it wasn't just the money, it was the how, right? Filming all 3 simultaneously.
That was the masterstroke, really. Unprecedented for something on this scale. It meant consistency, keeping the massive cast and crew together, locking in the look and feel across the whole story.
Like building a whole world at once. In New Zealand?
Essentially, yes. They shot concurrently in Jackson's native New Zealand from October 99 right through to December 2000.
A massive undertaking.
And even then, they needed pickup shots that went on until 2003. Imagine the logistics. Multiple film units scattered across the country, all capturing different parts of Middle-earth at the same time.
Incredible coordination needed. How did they even begin to create the look, the feel of Middle-earth?
Well, a huge part of that was Weta Workshop, led by Jackson's longtime collaborator, Richard Taylor. They focused on 5 key areas: armor, weapons, the amazing prosthetic makeup, creatures, and miniatures, or bigatures, as they called them.
Right, the detail was just phenomenal.
But crucially, Jackson made a brilliant move early on. He brought in Alan Lee and John Howe, the renowned Tolkien illustrators.
Oh, wow. Their artwork basically is Middle-earth for so many people.
Exactly. And having them involved meant their iconic visions could be directly translated into the physical designs for the films. It gave it that instant sense of authenticity, but also felt real.
And Jackson himself had a very specific idea about that realness, didn't he? He doesn't want typical fantasy.
No, he was very clear. He wanted realism, not, as he put it, fantasy mumbo-jumbo. He actually cited Braveheart as an inspiration.
Braveheart, interesting comparison.
Yeah, he wanted that sense of historical authority, like an epic grounded in some kind of reality rather than the look of, say, The Dark Crystal or Willow. More grit, less fairy tale.
So that grounded approach, how'd that challenge the designers, making fantasy look historical?
It presented huge challenges. Take armor, for example. It had to look real, functional, like it belonged to a specific culture in Middle-earth. But it also had to be light enough for actors to fight in for
Right.
hours.
Practical considerations.
They studied historical armor making, but used modern materials and techniques. And that drive for realism pushed Weta Digital, the effects side too. They had to invent new technology.
Like the massive software for the battles.
Exactly. Massive allowed them to create those huge armies where every single soldier seemed to be thinking and reacting independently. It wasn't just copy-pasting crowds, it was simulating behavior.
That's what made those battle scenes so convincing.
And they also pushed motion capture forward, especially for Gollum. Capturing Andy Serkis's performance with that level of nuance was groundbreaking. It really redefined digital characters.
It's amazing how much things changed during development. I read that the script went through some pretty wild variations.
Oh, yeah.
Like what? Well, apparently characters like Fatty Bolger, even Tom Bombadil, were considered for cameos at different points.
Bombadil almost made it. Wow.
And get this, one idea had Gimli swearing constantly. And another version had Arwen not just fighting at Helm's Deep, but joining the Fellowship earlier in Rohan.
Arwen in the Fellowship, that would have changed things dramatically.
Apparently, there was even a proposed nude scene for her and Aragorn in the Glittering Caves.
Seriously? Okay, that definitely didn't make the cut. It really shows you how many paths the adaptation could have taken.
Totally. It highlights the evolution. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. The visuals are stunning, but the music. Howard Shore's score is just as vital, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely inseparable from the films. Shore composed, orchestrated, and conducted everything, and he was deeply involved from very early on. He actually visited the set back in 1999, before filming really got underway.
Immersing himself in the world.
Yeah, apparently he was already sketching out themes like the Shire theme and Frodo's theme right then and there.
And the complexity of that score.
Yeah.
The leitmotifs.
That's really the core of its genius. Shore created somewhere between 85 and 110 distinct musical themes, leitmotifs for different characters, cultures, places, even objects like the ring itself.
85 to 110. That's staggering.
It's the largest catalog of leitmotifs in cinema history, way more than even the Star Wars saga. It's this incredibly rich musical language that guides you emotionally, tells you who's important, where the danger lies. It adds layers upon layers to the storytelling.
And it wasn't just Shore and the orchestra, right? Some of the actors contributed too.
That's right. The London Philharmonic did the heavy lifting, of course, but you had Billy Boyd singing Edge of Night.
Shipping song, yeah. Chillin'.
Viggo Mortensen sang the Aragorn coronation chant he'd partly composed. Liv Tyler sang. Even Peter Jackson himself apparently played a single gong strike in the Two Towers.
No way. A director cameo in the
A
Sopranos.
tiny one. And then there's Into the West, the end credit song for Return of the King. That has a really poignant story behind it. It was written by Fran Walsh, Annie Lennox, and Howard Shore as a tribute to a young New Zealand filmmaker, Cameron Duncan, who Jackson and Walsh had befriended. He died of cancer in 2003, quite young.
Wow, I didn't know that. That adds another layer of emotion to an already powerful song.
It really does. It connects the epic fantasy back to something very human.
So the films come out, and they're just huge, right? Financially, critically.
Undeniably. A massive, massive success. Over $2.9 billion worldwide at the box office. Still one of the highest grossing film series ever.
And a huge point of pride for New Zealand, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. It holds the record for the highest grossing film series in New Zealand's own cinema history. It put the country on the map in a whole new way.
And the acclaim was pretty universal, too.
Widespread acclaim, yes. Critics, audiences, they're consistently ranked among the greatest film trilogies. Wired magazine readers voted Fellowship the greatest fantasy movie ever back in 2012. Return of the King also ranked very high.
It really tapped into something. I remember reading a piece in the New York Times suggesting that regular rewatching, especially of the extended editions, became a specific thing for millennial women, comparing it almost to Star Wars fandom.
That's interesting. Why do you think that connection resonated so strongly?
Maybe the depth of the world building, the strong themes of friendship, loyalty, endurance, the strong female characters, even if their roles were expanded from the books.
Could be all of those. The sheer immersion, perhaps. Especially with the extended cuts, you're spending, 11, 12 hours in Middle-earth? It becomes a familiar, comforting place for many.
And other filmmakers noticed too, right? Big names were impressed.
Definitely. Spielberg, James Cameron, George Lucas. They all praised the series. And John Boorman, who tried to adapt it himself decades earlier, basically said, Jackson achieved something on the scale of building a cathedral. High praise.
Not everyone was a fan. Ralph Bakshi, the animator.
Ah, yes. Bakshi was quite critical initially. He felt Jackson didn't really get Tolkien, that it was all about special effects and selling toys. He even accused Jackson of borrowing from his animated film without giving credit.
Ouch. Did he stick to that?
He did soften his stance later. He apologized for some comments and did praise the technical achievements, the special effects. But it shows how passionate people are about Tolkien and how adaptations can stir up strong feelings.
Speaking of strong feelings, the awards, the Oscars especially.
Just unprecedented for fantasy films. 30 Academy Award nominations across the trilogy, 17 wins. That's a record for any film trilogy.
And Return of the King, the clean sweep.
Astounding. 11 nominations, 11 wins, tying the all-time record held by Ben-Hur and Titanic, Best Picture, Best Director. It was a phenomenal achievement.
It wasn't just the big ones either, was it? They won for technical stuff, too.
Exactly, and that's fascinating. They won a Technical Achievement Award specifically for rendering realistic skin on the digital creatures, and the massive software for the battles won a Scientific and Engineering Award.
So recognition for both the art and the science behind it.
Precisely. It really highlights that blend of artistry and cutting-edge innovation that made the films possible.
Okay, so massive success, tons of awards. You'd think everyone would agree these films are masterpieces, end of story. But there's still this debate, isn't there?
Yeah.
About how faithful they are to the books.
Oh, absolutely. That discussion is still very much alive. Why do you think it persists so strongly?
Well, the books are just so beloved, so detailed. Any change is going to be noticed, right? And Tolkien's own son, Christopher Tolkien, was famously unimpressed.
He was quite critical, finding Jackson's interpretation unacceptable, I believe was the word used. He felt it lost the essence of his father's work.
But others see it differently. Scholars, too.
Right. Opinions really vary. You have scholars like Tom Shippey who see it as maybe a partial success, capturing some themes well, maybe missing others. Then some critics argue the films prioritize action and spectacle over the book's deeper psychological journey, especially Frodo's internal struggle.
The idea that Aragorn becomes the central hero more than Frodo. The American monomyth argument.
Exactly, that the focus shifted toward a more conventional hero's journey centered on Aragorn, potentially simplifying the more complex, polyphonic nature of the book.
But there's a counter-argument there, too, isn't there? That faithfulness isn't just about plot points.
Yes, definitely. Scholars like Yvette Kuzor argue that while Jackson changed many details, he managed to capture a similar emotional impact, that feeling of providence, of deeper forces at work, which is core to Tolkien.
And Dimitri Fimi even suggested Jackson was kind of creating his own modern folklore, weaving in fan expectations and movie traditions alongside Tolkien.
Which is a fascinating way to look at adaptation, isn't it? Not just translation, but transformation. Creating something new that stands alongside the original.
Let's talk about the different versions we can watch. Many of you listening probably have the extended editions.
The DVDs or Blu-rays, they add a lot of footage back in.
Yeah, like 30 minutes for Fellowship, 44 for Two Towers, and almost an hour 51 minutes for Return to the King. That's substantial.
It really is. And Peter Jackson himself had an interesting take on the two cuts.
What did he say? Which one is the real version?
Well, he maintained that the theatrical cuts were the definitive versions for the cinema experience, paced deliberately for that setting. But he also said the extended cuts would likely be seen as more definitive over time.
Why the distinction?
Because the extended cuts allowed him to put back some of the harder-edged violence trimmed for the PG-13 rating, and more importantly, he could adjust the pacing for home viewing, letting scenes breathe more, which works better when you're watching on a smaller screen and can pause.
Makes sense. And they keep polishing these films, right? The 4K remasters.
They do. Most recently for 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, Jackson oversaw it, apparently removing and painting out imperfections, standardizing the color grading across the trilogy, and adding a new Dolby Atmos sound mix.
So even 20 years on, they're ensuring you get the best possible version.
They're treating it like the classic it is. And connecting this to the bigger picture, the legacy is immense. It changed Peter Jackson's career, obviously. It influenced countless fantasy films that followed.
And New Zealand, the home of Middle-earth.
Tourism boomed. It became a huge part of their national identity and branding. The impact there was just massive economically and culturally.
And that success inevitably led to more Middle-earth on screen. The Hobbit trilogy.
Right, which was its own complex production story. And now we have spin-offs in the works, like the animated War of the Rohirrim and a live-action film focused on Gollum.
The Hunt for Gollum. So the story continues. But it wasn't all smooth sailing post-release, right? Legal issues.
Unfortunately, yes. Big success often brings disputes over money. There were legal battles over profit sharing involving some cast members and even the Tolkien Trust. It just underscores how incredibly valuable that intellectual property became.
So we've journeyed from early animation confusion to a global phenomenon through groundbreaking tech, iconic music, and intense debates about adaptation. It really is an incredible story behind the story.
It absolutely is. A testament to Peter Jackson's vision, yes, but also to the immense collaboration involved, and of course, the enduring power of Tolkien's original work.
This deep dive really underscores that adapting something so beloved is never simple. It's a process of constant choices, compromises, risks, and moments of genuine, brilliant innovation.
Exactly. And the result is something that, while maybe different from the source in ways, resonates so powerfully on its own terms. It becomes part of the ongoing conversation about Middle-earth.
So what does this all mean for you, listening? Maybe the next time you watch any adaptation of a book you love, think about that journey. The countless decisions, the arguments, the creative leaps that happen behind the scenes. What do you value most? Is it sticking rigidly to the text, or is it capturing the spirit, even if the details change? And ultimately, which Middle-earth lives most vividly for you, the one Tolkien wrote, or the one Jackson put on screen? Which one holds your heart?